So like specific to some of the experiences we're talking about, like I learned in my family, we have what are called the heart and ass rules. So one is a full heart always beats a half ass. The other one is put your heart into it or take your ass out of it. And then the last one is taken from Stephen Pressfield, where he says, put your ass where your heart wants to be. I always tell people the way I teach it is that there's always three components. It's a given. It's gravity, it's tension, and relaxation. The better somebody manages tension to create stability, the better they're going to be able to relax. But they have to be able to relax. One is that like people who think you're weak offer you excuses. People who think you can be strong will offer you a challenge. And so I love the opportunity to get in front of people and hold them responsible. And a lot of people in our field, I think, are hesitant to do that. And that just shows me that they haven't had that much responsibility yet, because when you really understand where that can take you in your relationship, in all of your relationships, then you understand that having those high standards it's the only way to operate in a way that you can be really proud of.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Voices of Valor podcast. I'm your host, Michael Macri. Today we're joined by head strength coach at Trinity University, Daniel Martinez. I've known Dan for almost 10 years now, and in the time that I've known him, he has left a big mark on the industry with his work in the jump profiling and jump testing, particularly with forced X. He has worked with countless athletes across professional world, NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, and of course with Trinity University and also USA volleyball athletes. So I'm very excited for this episode. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
With everything that you've seen and all the experiences that you had, what are some of the most proudest moments and achievements that you've had in your career?
I'm proud of the fact that I've been successful and changed, pivoted, gone in different directions. Like I've worked in so many different roles at this point. I used to run a club volleyball program and was an owner of a gym that was an extension of, and I stepped away from that. And I was a personal trainer in the very beginnings of my career and did really well with that, and then redirected, went back to school, and I decided to pursue strength and conditioning specifically, and have worked in the university setting after being a consultant for a few years. And all of it, like I've been really intentional about growing through it all, but all of those things came with difficult moments. And, it's the things that make you second guess your career, like whether this is what you want to be doing. Some things made me step away, like the gym I had was doing really well, and I decided to go a different direction and kind of, compress a little bit with things, and operationally, I think just changed and really pivoted in a completely new direction. I'm grateful for where that's brought me. If I think specifically, there are certainly, like I had some reflective moments a couple of years ago with our volleyball program, which we made a big shift in 2017, 2018, which is largely a reflection of me going full-time at the university. I've worked with Trinity's volleyball program since 2008, and I've been there full-time as the head strength coach since 2017. So in that first, maybe it was 2018, we had our first volleyball athlete who really kind of turned the corner with things and made a decision to be all in. And then that next season, actually, she had a great season. The team did not. And we had a first round NCAA tournament exit. And she had a moment with the team where she encouraged them. And she's a very introverted girl. She encouraged them to put their hearts into it and get their butts in the weight room, and that it would be worth it. And to their credit, the rest of the team did, and they followed through. And I got to compliment them on that. And then we've had a run now where 5 of the last 6 years, we've at least made the Sweet 16. This year, we're in the Final Four again. We were in the Final Four 2 years ago. We were national runner-up in 2022, 2023, one of those years. So we've had just a really great run of doing really well specific to that program. And I see a lot of that reflected in the rest of what we have going on at Trinity. Some of that, the challenging part is that some of it's cyclical. You can't count on being there forever. Sometimes you have some success, leadership changes, your personnel changes, and then sometimes it's a step backwards. And so learning to be responsible with all of it has been equally satisfying part of it.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's obviously the great part of working in this industry, right? Because you're dealing with a bunch of athletes that you hope to put your mark on them, but they also put their mark on you. Through all the success that you have achieved, right? People only see that success, but they don't see the challenges,
For sure.
right, that
Yeah.
only you know about
Right.
because you're in that position. And then you have young strength coaches that see what you do and go, oh, he's at the top. But there's also additional challenges because you are in that authority position. So, what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way throughout your career that you've only found or they've only been revealed to you once you were at the top?
One of the best lessons I have is that as a gym owner, when I made that transition from being the trainer and coach of teams in that program into an owner and director of that program, was that I was the same person, and yet my title and my role made people treat me differently. And realizing
Yeah.
that there were people who were huge fans of mine, and all of a sudden I had to make decisions that were organizationally focused and sometimes team focused or in support of our organization, specific to coaches and what decisions they make. And I'm not pro your kid all the time anymore. You know, I've got like a bigger focus now, and seeing that people would, you know, all of a sudden I'm a bad guy, you know, like my friend Charlie Weingroff used to tell me, it's just like, sometimes all you have to do to be the bad guy is tell the truth, you know, and
Yeah.
I've taken that to heart, and it's the truth for sure, you know, and I felt that. And so it just taught me that you got to do things the right way, and people will judge you. People will mistreat you. Some people will appreciate you. I had one experience with a parent who we had hired a coach, and it was controversial because she had worked with some of the girls privately. And so they were like, oh, she's going to have special relationships. And we felt like it was the right call to hire her. And so we went forward with that. He gave me a real earful going through that. And we had a successful year. The coach was outstanding. The team had an outstanding, amazing year. And at the end of the season, everything's said and done. Dad calls me up and he says, that was the right decision. And that felt pretty good because, you know, it was nice to see someone in that case humble himself and recognize that we were acting in their best interest, even if it didn't feel like that at the time. And I think that's a reflection of trust that you can build.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's actually a great little story there, because from a moment where someone essentially was like suspect in trusting you and your abilities or the direction you're going, and all of a sudden sees the end game and goes, oh, okay, now I'm fully trusting of you. Like at this time of the year when we go into, you know, playoffs with, you know, college football, NFL and whatnot, everyone's going to talk about, for the teams that are successful, oh, there's great buy-in here, the coach did great, all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I've sort of realized myself that there's a fine line between buy-in and compliance, right?
Right.
So as a strength coach, leader, you want to have your athletes, your staff, your coaches emotionally invested in the direction that you're going. So, you know, over the years, like what are some of the strategies that you've used to be able to get that emotional investment so that people are all going in one direction, not just going through the motions?
Yeah, I'm very philosophical, and sometimes that can be a lot, especially for young people. So I always have philosophical anchor points, things that like I really want to ground them with. And there's a few ways of saying it that I've taken to over the year that I think have been my go-tos essentially. One is that like people who think you're weak offer you excuses. People who think you can be strong will offer you a challenge. And so I love the opportunity to get in front of people and hold them responsible. And a lot of people in our field, I think, are hesitant to do that. And that just shows me that they haven't had that much responsibility yet, because when you really understand where that can take you in your relationship, all of your relationships, then you understand that having those high standards it's the only way to operate in a way that you can be really proud of. Otherwise, you're counting on the fact that you're their guy, which is a really suspect thing to do, certainly in our field.
They can also drop you very quickly, even when you are the guy.
100%. And it's like, and so people knowing that part of it is like, I think it enables you to operate. And I say this all the time. This is another one of my things. One of my anchors is saying like, what is it about your environment that tells you that you can't operate in truth? You know, and that's something that's so important to me, is to confront that. And a lot of it is fear-based or scarcity-based, and people like, it's like, I understand that energy. I've lived in that energy. And now I choose to operate from a place where I can offer other people clarity. And I know that that's what I express to them, and that they can trust that.
So like, what are your top three, like, philosophical ideals that if you were going to tell your younger self, what would it be? One
of the things is I say, love the team will love you back. You know, like, it's like one of those things where I view love as a very complex
Yeah, for sure.
dynamic. It doesn't mean that you're a rah-rah guy. That's not who I am at all. Like I bring a very calm, like centered energy to what I do. And what I want to see is people step into their own strength. I don't want to show them how strong I am in order to teach them to be strong necessarily. I certainly have a track record of challenging myself in ways to learn to express that. But it's not about me. I don't do that to impress them. If I have any record of that, I would say I would do that to impress upon them that it's important that you learn to lean into those energies.
Yeah, I get that. But you've learned, and we've spoken about this plenty of times, like it's growth through experience, right?
Right.
We've all been burnt or had
Yep.
successes that we've all can learn from, right? But as we get older and we have more experiences, we learn to, pull from those experiences that help us for the better. But along the way, when you look back on it, there are the challenges that we've been speaking about. There's always some conversation in the back of your mind that you may have thought, maybe I avoided that for too long.
Sure.
So in your career, in your experience, it doesn't have to be just at work in life. Like, what are some of the conversations that you avoided at the time that you feel like, well, if I had it at the time, I think we would have had greater growth as a result of that?
I mean, I have a pretty good track record in my recent, like, I'm trying to think of how far back I'd have to go to not do that. I do have with my former business partner when I owned the gym that I did that we had, and it's actually interesting because things came full circle in a way. But when I chose to depart, I didn't do it wasn't great energy that I did that with. I did that and it was really like, I stepped away and we resolved everything, but it didn't feel very good. So I had a point where I ran into my former business partner in an airport terminal at Dallas Love Field. It was actually interesting because we were in the one area where the two of us were, and there's this huge airport and we just happened to be in the same spot. But we got to resolve some of that, and that felt good. But that was certainly an example of me not expressing things with clarity and with honesty in a way that we could hold each other responsible, and that didn't feel very good, for sure.
For sure. It's like the story with Ghostbusters, I believe, or was it Groundhog Day with Bill Murray and is it Harold Ramis, is it? Where they had an argument and it happened for like, then you talked to each other for 25 years.
Yeah.
And only until Harold Ramis passed away did they resolve the differences. But then it's too late, right?
Right.
So communication and being able to express is super important.
Yeah.
And not just from our side of things, but also from coaches, athletes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny because sometimes you get a lens into how people are viewing things differently, not the way that you view things. For instance, recently I was watching a softball game with my assistant strength coach who I hired this past year, and I'm not sure if swearing's okay, but
you can swear, go for your life.
So we're watching this game, and I haven't watched sports with someone else in a while. It's been a minute, certainly live sports. We're watching this, and like our team's up to bat, and like strike goes over the plate. He's like, shit. And I'm like, I look at him, are you good? And then like, sure enough, another pitch comes, another strike, shit. And I was like, she's going to get another try at this, right? And in my heart, it's just, I'm so used to I know there's going to be another opportunity. I know she's going to grow through this. I know we grow through these things. So I don't feel bad at all for someone to have that challenge in front of them.
For sure.
So it doesn't create an emotional response for me, but I see people all the time who I believe are over-invested emotionally, but I haven't seen them paying close enough attention to the things that matter in a way that's going to influence that in a way that produces change. And that's where, of course, my heart centers in terms of influence. And in our influencer era, like it's a really important thing to have clarity on is like who you want to influence, why do you want to influence them, and then how are you going to influence them? Because they're being spoken to from so many different areas that grabbing their attention is a real challenge, and you've got to figure out how to get clear on that.
For sure. And like, obviously, you know me well enough by now that I am very blunt in my assessments. I can read the room, but I don't sugarcoat things. And that's just my way of communicating. And my mum, when I grew up, she would always say, you also have to listen with your eyes. If someone is not looking at you, they're not paying attention. Sure. So again, communication for me is such a big thing. Yeah. And it spins into like relationships and do they work and whatnot. Being around as many elite performers as you have been throughout your career, like what do the elite athletes, coaches, how do they communicate? Like what? Because obviously they're elite for a reason, and that's part of it. So what do they do that makes them elite on the communication standpoint?
Yeah, it's funny because, in the consultancy space where you're coming into another organization's doors and you're getting a lens into how they do things, it's funny how quickly some of those differences stand out, and some people, I've told people, like, you could be in a team where historically, just on in terms of the visibility of professional sports teams, sometimes I'm like, the way you think that team operates is exactly how I think they operate, having been
Yeah.
in an experience with them, and some of the higher performing organizations, seeing those differences be pronounced in positive ways was, of course, is just as empowering as just to see, oh, wow, you guys, like, you actually operate from these high standards. Like, that's
Yeah.
actually really incredible. At the same time, I've had enough experience from different roles that I've gotten big timed on more than one occasion. We have NBA teams specifically who come through Trinity every so often, and every once in a while I'll encounter someone who has no idea who I really am. They just see me as Trinity strength coach, has no idea I've worked in that space, and will big time me. And I've had one notable example where a guy did that, and then he came to my office with me and saw the cork board with pictures and people,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden he starts dawning on him. He thinks he's like, "What was your name again?" And then starts kind of backtracking.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, I've been meaning to reach out. Like, I saw some of your stuff. I've heard you interview, and I'm like, cool, man.
No, you haven't. You're just trying to be polite.
Well, it's hopefully everybody grows in those experiences,
For
but at the
sure.
same time, like, I'm one to say, like, that doesn't feel very good for me, and I don't have a hard time, like, calling it out and saying that, like, that's somebody who thinks that they're bigger than somebody else, and maybe he's right. But in my experience, I've learned to value engagement with another person as an opportunity to grow together, and I'm grateful for that. And they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, I understand that. But also from what you've learned, even whether you through your consultancies at that level or when they come through Trinity and you see these high performers doing X, Y, and Z, has any of those sort of methods, strategies, processes like been brought into your own that you've been able to utilize over the years?
Oh, good question. I don't think so. Not specific to a way that I would say, like, produced change for me. It was actually an interesting thing because there's a point where, yes, in the force plate space, there was a point where I was doing some things that were relatively transformative for the field.
Yeah.
And there was a traction that produced. And then there were people who were really supportive of that. And it kind of blew me away because I thought I was going to be doing that, is like I was going to step into these environments and I was going to learn and have a bunch of takeaways. And I even called a mentor of mine at one point, and I was confused by the scenario. I said, I keep on thinking that I'm going to show up and I'm going to learn something. I said, I'm walking away from these engagements and they're acting like I've brought them the best things since sliced bread sometimes. And he told me, he said, Daniel, he said, like, in pro sports, sometimes, it's August, they do August things, like they have the recipe and they're just trying to stay on the hamster wheel, like, and it's just, and you're just trying to be productive, but you're not trying to do anything innovative or necessarily new all the time. And not that that's what I was necessarily offering, but it was a different way of looking at things. And I took a lot of pride in the fact that the way that I demonstrated people could integrate force plates into that environment was reflective of what I did as a coach first, who brought the science into it, validated that after the fact. Is that it was like I'd done that by cutting my teeth, working with like middle school and high school athletes, not in the elite sport space.
For sure. And I want to touch upon like the transformative force plate, process that you have done, because as long as I've known you, like, to me, when everyone brings up, I know everyone brings up, Daniel Cohen and whatnot,
Sure.
but like he's also been a mentor to you and
Yeah,
you've worked
right,
with him
100%.
closely. So, but I don't know him as well.
Sure.
So every time someone talks about the force plate, I'm like, Daniel Martinez, he's like a genius, right?
Sure.
So I want to talk about more of that stuff because you've showed me over the years and it's super impressive. But in this day and age, everyone uses force plates.
Sure.
But as you know, it's very much a FOMO copycat industry.
Yep.
And there's still a lot of people out there that use it and have no idea what to do with it.
Right.
And because it is complex, it's very technical. So let's start off first with some of the transformative stuff that you've done with it, but then how you've been able to communicate that complexity to your athletes, your coaches, in order to provide that buy-in, because that's very important.
Sure. I mean, I think the main thing was specific to what you can do with force plates and software is, instead of viewing it as like this, like, you're trying to do everything. It's like, no, actually there's specific tests that you want to run, tests that have been validated through research over time and are, kind of your ground floor as far as your expression from your athletes, but, very much like a lens into what I would call like the hardware capabilities of a strength power athlete specifically. But basically the lens that I offered was looking at it and going phase specific with things, which again, if you're looking at braking phase and propulsive phase and things like that, going into that, looking at the physiological specific adaptations that you're creating and then using that as the way that you aligned your profiling. So essentially, like when you look at what's happening from a phase specific standpoint, if you go just phase by phase, you can align your training to look at what's accessible to you. And then you've got a short and long curve that presents itself for development. And the short curve is essentially like the tactical strategic elements of how do you make somebody a better jumper, which again, saying people are still like sometimes slow in adopting that part. Like if I see one more video of somebody on force plates staring at an iPad, like I'll lose my mind, specifically when that athlete doesn't even understand how to extend their body fully. Like that's infuriating to someone like me. But, again, people grow on their own curve. So that's fine. But it's just cart before the horse kind of thing. So there are things that I would consider low hanging fruit, specifically like I always preach eccentric velocity is like being like when you think of how to access power and if you want to say impulse in vertical jump performance, I'm like, okay, if we're just talking force, then force is mass times acceleration. Okay, well, we're talking about fixed body mass, meaning you're not changing your mass unless you're going to add weights to your jump, which biases towards in one direction. So what's the mechanism? What are we looking at? We're looking at acceleration. Okay, what acceleration? Negative acceleration. We're looking at how fast can you go down? So we know that force drops when you go into the unweighting phase of a counter movement jump specifically, and when you're doing depth and drop jumps, that there is a relaxation phase, but it doesn't mean that you're coming into that jump passively, right? So thinking about what that energy represents when someone's creating load, there are forces being applied, and like when you look at great decelerators, they're better at applying them. It's like, well, where's that coming from? Well, it comes largely from center of gravity and from their ability to, take the slack out of their body and pull themselves to the ground in the same way that a great weightlifter would go from that up phase into the catch phase, in the same ways that, again, in like sports like basketball and football where someone's going to be able to change direction effectively. And so being able to prioritize deceleration when we know energetically that has the largest potential to transform an athlete's performance is like, it doesn't sound like rocket science.
Sure. But it does to some people. So let's take it that step further and go, okay, what have you learned from basically that technical breakdown, which is great. It gives you, it's like what we do at Valor. We're all about the movement efficiency. We're all about, proper biomechanical application, right? But then you take that information and then you use it to apply to real world decision making. So what have you learned from going from A to B in that sense?
Well, two things is an easy way to capture it is like what I learned from Duncan French is we coach movement and we train forces. So it's like, okay, so then the training the forces is the hardware component, the coaching movement is the software. So like I tell people, for myself personally, coming into force plates, I was post my competitive weightlifting career where I competed in Olympic weightlifting, and I wasn't touching heavy training at any point during me working heavily in the force plate space. And so I've never touched a 50 plus jump. So even though when people watch me, they're like, oh, you got good balance and you move really well. And I'm like, yeah, this is true. I'm like, but I've never touched the big outputs. And the reason for that is because I haven't addressed those hardware components, meaning maximal strength and power, specific to my timeline, of course. So coaching the movement, training the forces. So I move really well, but the forces are just not there, So that's a very specific thing. And you can teach people to look like good jumpers, which is what people really criticize now. They're like, oh, they move and it's fake because it's not the sport and all those things. I'm like, that's fine. I'm like, but when you see someone who can't hinge and you think because you taught them an RDL that they're going to learn to do that dynamically in a vertical jump and those things are the same thing, it's not. They complement each other, but again, like that's the reason that we train, is to teach those things. The second part of it is learning to deconstruct those characteristics. And because a lot of people will bias towards impulse and like, well, impulse is what predicts jump performance. I'm like, fair. How do you communicate impulse as, again, to your point, how do you soften that for somebody who's not a sports scientist? How do you communicate impulse to an athlete or to another coach even? It's like, okay, well, what I do is deconstruct it. And okay, so we've got a down speed and we have a down force. And we can measure that specifically with force plates. We can look at what was your down speed. And it's not uncommon, specifically in athletes who haven't trained in plyometrics properly, for them to bias on a test towards the high forces without the velocities. So I have one notable example where I had, out of our top 3 jumpers in one year, which included the female volleyball player I was talking about before, her negative velocity, her peak negative velocity on her vertical jump was -2 meters per second. That was double the speed of our other 2 top jumpers, who were both male athletes. So those are male athletes who spent plenty of time in a weight room, have really specific outputs. One of them was like a 10.6, 10.7 sprinter in the 100 meters. And another one was a accomplished high jumper. So those are guys who can access those characteristics, but they're not demonstrating or expressing that specific to their profiling. So that's a problem. Sometimes you could say, well, they have it. And I'm like, well, how well trained, how robust is that training and adaptation? What's their level of understanding on that? There's a great example floating in social media right now, maybe specific to my algorithm, but with Stephen Holm, a famous high jumper, where they show his vertical jump test and then his high jump performance, and they're completely different. And I think my goal, and everyone's goal as a coach, is to complement every available quality through their career in the most efficient means possible.
For sure,
right? So it's like, because you'll get that too, where you'll say people like, oh, I let them jump naturally, and then we develop a program. I'm like, that's fine. I'm like, do you let them squat naturally when you're teaching them? No? Okay, well, there's a point that coaching comes into it, and I'm okay doing that. It's like, if I don't want to, if I'm not coaching a test specifically when they're jumping on force plates, you don't want to do that. Okay. But there is a point where you're going to apply influence here. And that's what I'm talking about. And that's what we would call the tactical strategic component.
Yeah, and that's great. I love all this sort of stuff because it's like mental notes for me. But let's unpack that a little bit, because you've mentioned a lot of things where in the same sport, you have number of different athletes with different profiles. I've also, and I'm sure you have too, been in the situation where it's like, let's utilize this technology as force plates so that we can help them do and particularly for high jumping and long jump, it's a very unique skill.
Right.
But you have to differentiate between how do we fix the skill and how do we fix the physical aspect to it. Through all the complexities that we have in the same sport, take other sports that have different profiles altogether. Soccer, American football, basketball, track, yet coaches out there are still putting a one-size-fits-all to jump testing. So, because I see this, and I travel a lot, I see all this. So I don't agree with that, and no, you don't agree with that. So what advice would you give to strength coaches that we are in this, data information world where they're like, you know what, we're going to just do counter movement jumps for everyone, for all sports. So what advice would you give to people that are doing a one-size-fits-all? And then secondly, what I want to know is, if you were in front of a group of strength coaches, what would be like the 3 main jumps for optimal performance for them to get the most out of their program in whatever sport?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. I would say, like, be specific is probably the best piece of advice, is like, and because as I was talking about before, you can go to phase specific analysis. For some coaches, they'll get overwhelmed with that pretty quickly. But phase specific analysis is a thing, as is phase specific adaptation, meaning that like something can look like something, but if it doesn't produce a change in that something, that's really the thing that you're wanting. And you need to make sure that you have the capacity to change that. For instance, what most people think when they think jump performance is immediately like, well, let's load it up. But the first thing that happens as you start producing load is that your negative velocities will be affected, and people will start to apply a pacing strategy to their jump, meaning they won't be as aggressive in that counter movement phase, in that downward velocity phase. And if you're chasing that, you're going to miss. At the same time, you can't count on having the ability to do plyometrics aggressively at all time points in the year. So you can't just say, oh, I'll do plyos for that speed. Well, sometimes doing plyos may be inappropriate. It may be the wrong call based on the time of year. So part of it is understanding that you need a vocabulary, a movement vocabulary around how to teach athletes to train, develop, and express forces specific to jump performance. And then I'm trying to remember this. What's the second part of the question?
Like the recommendations on the types of jump strength coaches should be utilizing.
Yeah.
And just keep, because like you look at Force Decks right now.
Yep.
They have like 50,000 different jumps.
Sure,
and it's like, a strength coach, you're looking at, oh my God, like, what do I do?
Sure.
So to narrow the focus for them, like if you had to say, hey, use these 2 or these 3 jumps, like what would they be?
Yeah. So I would separate it to say like, okay, if you're talking day one, because like, for instance, day one, I would suggest counter movement jump and then a 10-5 RSI is a good start.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because drop jump performance requires more familiarization. Counter movement jumps can require that. You'll see a lot of funky jumps, specifically when you ask athletes to keep their hands on their hips in the early stages. So that becomes a legitimate consideration, but it is insight into what their current training status is, if they have any understanding of the qualities that I'm talking about, because better trained athletes, even in the absence of jump specific training, will still find a way to produce some real horsepower in those tests. So counter movement jump and a 10-5 RSI, I would say specifically. I'm also an advocate of the isometric mid-thigh pull or an isometric squat, because again, if you think day one and you have the time available to do something like that, which is always a significant factor, if you have the capacity to do that, it reduces the variability of repetition maximum training, where people are going to change the range of motion, they're going to change the shape, they're going to change the stance, things like that. You can standardize an isometric mid-thigh pull and isometric squat more effectively. So those 3 tests, the third not being a jump test specifically, but relating to those qualities for sure.
I think the isometric mid-thigh pull is the forgotten, underrated test that people have sort of pushed to the wayside. But in saying that, though, I want you to like, end the debate right now on the jumps of, is it hands on hips or is it just go for your life with the arms?
I go hands on hips because I always tell people, I'm like, you want to use your arms? Are you good at it? Because most of them are not. Where I would define being good at it means like toenails to fingernails, like from the bottom of your loading phase up into full extension of the jump. And you'll see a lot of them kind of flap their arms around, and that feels better to them, but they're not using it to effectively improve their jump performance. And what we see in the literature is that arm action will increase probably 10 to 20% jump performance. And at the same time, it's going to automatically shift many counter movement jump tests from a single peak into a double peak jumper, which is something that a lot of people are just not giving consideration.
Sure.
It's going to change the force time relationship of a jump test.
And for those people that don't understand that double peak, do you want to just quickly explain that?
I don't know if there's a quickly explain. Essentially, you're going to create more deceleration, and that's going to change the gear changes that are going to occur. A lot of people, specifically early in their career, sometimes specific to the type of athlete and jumper they are, will bias towards a single peak because it's very efficient. So when you use the cues of jump testing, which most people say, hey, jump high and fast or jump explosively, a lot of people will bias towards the speed of it. And so they'll just do a more vertical torso, faster, more shallow dip. The athletes who will use a little bit more compliance, more braking, will drop into the jump, basically drop lower into their stance and then jump up.
That's me, my bucket
often produce a double peak, and that's reflective of those gear changes that are occurring.
Yeah.
And because the real trick of it is, we know that the biggest forces are going to occur in that eccentric phase. So you're ramping up eccentric force. You're trying to catch those forces. And then you're holding on to that as you transition into the propulsive phase. So as they're extending up. But the propulsive phase, the big thing that I'm always trying to impress upon people is that it's like trying to ride a bicycle downhill. It's trying to hold on to those forces as you're extending and you're starting to bias towards velocity. You're moving faster and faster, but you're still trying to get energy off of the ground. Well, that requires a ton of coordination, balance, and control in order to accelerate, all the way into good length. So I always teach athletes to find length off the floor. So the floor is like the reserve of energy that they're going to use. So they're trying to grab it in that eccentric phase and they're trying to release it, but using good body position to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you heard it here first. Hands on hips. Don't fiddle with your arms.
Yeah. I mean, you can add arms. I would wait to look at arms after you've taught them to use their arms.
For sure, yeah. But I want to go a little bit further into that in terms of like the jump profiling, because as you know, we've spoken about, I'm from Australia, you did your master in Australia. It's growing in America, but we're huge on long-term athlete development, right?
Sure.
So everything we've spoken about today, you could argue that, hey, this may be already for an elite jumper or someone in your program that has a training age more than 2 or 3. So how do you, put through your jump processes and your protocols in terms of your profile from a long-term athlete development standpoint?
You mean like with the idea
Correct,
being to
yes.
start from
So let's say you have a 10-year-old in your midst and you want to apply your jump profile into that 10-year-old so that they can be developed to the point where they get to the college level or at the Olympic level.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I've trained a very small number of athletes in that age range, but I have trained a number of them, and honestly, that's a big part of where my model has come
It
from.
might even be from the college level, because when you get a freshman to the moment they're a senior, or now when they're a 14-year vet in college because of NIL, like it's still the same sort of deal, right?
100%. Yeah, I think it's something. A lot of times you're just having to walk some of those things back, and that's the part where, even though we're talking about being very specific with adaptations, and I always use the question, in order to do what? Like, you want to do this exercise or this training plan, or you want to do this jump test in order to do what? What's the insight it's gonna provide? What's the adaptation it's gonna produce? But when we're going into that and we go phase specific, like that's one of the reasons that coaches start teaching snap downs.
Yeah.
Is because it's a good way to get a lot of repetition and kind of load up that phase specific component of deceleration, which is, again, it's the way that they're going to access force in plyometric movements. At the same time, like, you can work with much more modest movements in younger athlete populations. And frankly, the older they get while not being trained, the more time you're going to want to spend in that extensive plyometric category, teaching them how to yield and how to support those positions. I always tell people, the way I teach it is that there's always 3 components. It's a given. It's gravity, it's tension, and relaxation. The better somebody manages tension to create stability, the better they're going to be able to relax. But they have to be able to relax, right? You can't we're not robots, which is where the people who are advocates of more natural athletic movements will jump into things as saying, well, why don't you just do this? And I'm like, well, that'd be great if I could package it, if I could train it in an elevator, if that's what I needed to do. Is some of our facilities are biased to is like, well, what's the space that you have available? What's the number of athletes you want to train? And then that's what leads us to specific practices that we use as coaches.
Well, appreciate you sharing, because I've loved hearing over the last 25 minutes or so, like, your coaching philosophy. And even though I know a lot about it anyway, because we've known each other for a long time, but what I want to actually delve into a bit more, because this is the part that I know is going to be brilliant, is obviously you've got mentors, you've learnt from a lot of people, they've helped shape your coaching philosophy. So if I had to sort of say to you, hey, off the top of your head, who are, and this doesn't have to stick with the sports performance, could be anybody.
Sure.
But who are in your life 3 people that you deeply admire? And for each of those people, can you give us 2 reasons as to why you admire them and how they've had a lasting impact on you?
Sure. I can give you 3 right off the bat. Dan Paff, Jeremy Shepard, and Daniel Cohen. Dan is a legend. He shocks me with his generosity and with his influence, like how generously he offers that to our field. And I had somebody visit me the other day who's actually working. He's a private coach for one of an NBA Supermax contract guy. Like, he just coaches that guy. And I was talking about having Dan as a mentor, and he says, oh yeah, I communicate with Dan. He says, sometimes I'll get emails from him and I'm just like shocked that he's spending his time helping me. And it's like, and he's an amazing coach and influence, and one of the most brilliant people that you'll ever have the opportunity to talk to, specific to this space, for sure.
For sure, yeah.
But yeah, like, I was attracted to, it's funny. I went to the first American lecture that Dan gave when he came back onto American soil after being in the UK and helping them prepare for was it 2012 Olympics?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
He was speaking in Phoenix, Arizona. Nick Winkleman had organized an NSCA clinic there, and it was actually one of the most incredible clinics that I've ever attended. And Dan was one of the speakers. And I've got a fanboy picture from at that point in my time where Dan, didn't know me from Adam, but he was still very generous with his time, followed up with me after the conference. I think he could sense the passion and enthusiasm that I bring to things. And I've counted on him as a mentor ever since. But that made a tremendous impression on me. And he's someone that I know that I can count on. Jeremy Shepard has largely been a more distant influence on me, but he is one of my motivations behind getting my ass to Australia and doing my master's degree there. His influence and his work there, like specifically in volleyball, was like something that I looked to in my career. It was really hard to find traction in the volleyball space specific to sports science and strength conditioning. And Jeremy's PhD work was awesome. And he's an amazing human being who, again, is very generous with his time and energy and how he continues to support the field. And yeah, he's great in that regard. And then Dr. Cohen has been somebody who's just like, really has changed the trajectory of my life with his influence and generosity as well. So I'd like to think that my own awareness has led me to those people, and I'm grateful for that. At the same time, like I credit them so much for having the influence and caring enough to do it.
That's awesome. And I've also had the privilege of meeting all three. I don't have as big a relationship with them as you do, but I got an awesome story about Jeremy Shepard when he was working in Australia for, I believe it was Australian Surfing. And at the time, it was 2014, and we had a player called Ben Teo who had played at the Brisbane Broncos.
Okay.
And we had signed him to come down to the Rabbitohs because he was like he was a game changer. He was a bit of a loose cannon. There's something wrong with him, but you need those types of people, right?
Sure.
So when he played, it was like round 20 or 21. So there's like 20, at the time there was 26 rounds in the National Rugby League. We played the Brisbane Broncos, and he wanted to prove himself to his, former friends, and he went absolutely nuts in that game and did a whole bunch of illegal stuff, which got him suspended for 5 or 6 weeks. Basically what happened was, because he was a bit of a pest, the team were like going to the head coach, we can't have Teets to be here for the next 6 weeks not playing and not being part of the practice because he's going to drive us all nuts. So what their high performance staff, or high performance manager, I spoke to the head coach, and they sent him up to Brisbane, and he spent, I think, like a few weeks with Jeremy. And Jeremy was like, this guy is absolutely a nut job, but he's such a hard worker. And it's funny because when we did the USOPC conference, was that 2018, 2019?
Yep.
I'd met Jeremy for the first time in person after talking like on Skype at the time, whatever. And we hadn't spoken in a few years. I brought that story up, and immediately we clicked. He's like, "Oh God, I'll never forget that." Yeah. So that's a fun little story about Jeremy.
Yeah, that's funny. I could share, not about Jeremy, but to complement that, specific to mentors and influence. I won't share which organization this was for, but I was up for a big job, and I'm trying to think, I had Jeremy's support. I'll be specific to that, to put me in line for that job. Mm-hmm. That was one factor. And then Dr. Cohen as well had been very supportive of that. So I got those two supporting me. So like a bit of an unfair advantage. And then at one point, Dan and I have a conversation, and he finds out that I'm interested in this position. And so he sends an email over there. And when I got, CC'd in the reply, I could literally see the guy falling over in his chair that Dan Paff has sent him an email, and that he's just like, mate, it's so great to connect, and I can't wait. I hope we can meet in person in the future, and and those kind of things are the kind of things that'll solidify a job before you have to do very much else. And that's, I'm grateful for the energy.
For sure. And we're going to just probably finish off here with a couple of short, sharp, questions and responses. So I'm going to start off with, obviously, we're going to stick with your coaching philosophy, right?
Sure.
So you've been around a lot of data over the years.
Yep.
So how has that data sort of either confirmed or retracted from what your coaching philosophy is, and how it's sort of like, have you made decisions that have been like positive or negative according to what you have seen in the data?
Yeah, I think it's been a huge factor. I think, as I said, like I came into it being somebody who was very curious about data, but not using it to the full extent that force plates would give you insight into. So working from that orientation, coaching and coach's eye kind of elements. And then, I had things like a Tendo unit and a contact pad early in my career. I mean, into force plates and getting firmly into data. And then now working back to the point where based on the volume of athletes that I see on the regular, we have to be very strategic about our interventions. And so it's a bit of a balance now. I'm grateful for the balance, but yeah, I'd say very much confirmed. It's forced me to, everything that I've expressed so far today, like that's largely reflective of the whole perspective. And it does, I'm a coach first and foremost, like that's the thing that I'm most grateful to be able to have influence around. And then the data that we generate, I use to reflect on whether we've connected effectively in that capacity.
I gotcha. So next thing is obviously at Valor, we're a biomechanics company, and we believe that biomechanics, which sadly so because it should always be at the forefront, but it's the next frontier. You can see that with the NBA and the NFL having their sort of like injury preventative mandates with using biomechanics and motion capture. What do you think is the next frontier in sports performance and performance science?
It's a good question. I would say, I think that we've gotten to the point where we're very performance oriented. And I think that the health components of it, I think are certainly going to be like, there's things that we do that we know are not longevity strategies. And I think that integrating that into it and this idea that like performance is not health. And while, we kind of like wink, like, oh yeah, we want to focus on health, but ultimately, there's definitely a fair amount of gaslighting that goes on in competitive sport environments. So figuring out how to own that authentically and not shy away from conversations that'll help us move into a place where those things can truly coexist, I think should be a step.
Where do you see the industry in 5 to 10 years time?
Good question. I mean, AI is huge right now. I hope that leads to some real like steps forward.
Yeah.
My fear is that we become over reliant and we forget that it's a checks and balances element to this, and like staying in touch with the human elements. And that's a huge part of whether people feel connected to your organization or they feel like everything is like transactional, like the transformative stuff that we're talking about is like, that's where my heart exists as a practitioner. And I think that's true for most of us. And we have to learn to complement that with the transactional and technical elements of it.
And finally, because this means I know a lot to you, but it means a lot to me as I'm 37 in March. Oh my God. I still think I'm 20. Yeah. But I'm a different person now to when I was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Believe it or not, and this is to my sisters because they think I'm still a child. Maybe I am at heart, but I've grown wiser. I've reflected more. In some cases, maybe I've become more emotional. But we live in a very fast-paced industry where people really don't give a shit about us until, it's like, what have you done for me lately, right? Yeah. But in a fast-paced environment that we are, people forget to look after themselves. So what are some of the ways or some of the strategies that you have for yourself to keep you centered, to keep you focusing on yourself and your family amidst all the chaos of this industry? And how have those strategies sort of helped you, like, basically in a way to say, hey, I'm giving advice to people that are a bit younger that can learn from this?
Yeah, I would say I could probably just put it in 3 buckets and say it's compassion is one, right? Courage is the other, and then detachment is the third component. So compassion has multiple, like I think a lot of people view this as like almost like feeling sorry for somebody, just like, oh, this is really hard, you're going through something. But compassion relates to passion, and passion means that like passion translates from Latin and it means to suffer. So when you're passionate about something, it means that there will be suffering, there will be blood. So it's like learning to be sensitive to the fact that that's all part of it. So if I'm offering compassion, I could be offering it and feeling that you're going through difficulty, but I also know that difficulty is it's the cost of growing into something that's beautiful, and that's what we should all be pursuing. And so I have to be supportive of both of those things, right? And that takes a lot of courage. Courage comes from Latin also and translates primarily to mean like to bring heart to it. So like specific to some of the experiences we're talking about, like I learned in my family, we have what are called the heart and ass rules. So one is a full heart always beats a half ass. The other one is put your heart into it or take your ass out of it. And then the last one is taken from Stephen Pressfield, where he says, put your ass where your heart wants to be. So if you're not in the space that you want to be, figure out what you need to do to be there. along with that, and an important complement to that is detachment, is knowing that like we can get so attached to the outcome that we want that we forget that that's not what defines us, right? And so detachment doesn't mean that you don't take ownership of things. It means that things don't own you. And that's a really important differentiator, because a lot of times we will not have any peace until it's done. And that's no way to operate. You will lose joy and you will lose heart in that process. And again, that's not any way to live a life.
No, I love that. And I might have to take a bit of advice out of your book too. But
Yeah.
what we're going to do is we're going to finish up with a little bit of a fun segment that I've been doing the last, who knows, probably 12 months or so, or maybe 10 months. We got a
Fair enough.
little spinning of the wheel back here. So move this around so we don't kill ourselves.
Sure.
So I'll explain this, and for those that don't know what this is, so I'll move this here. The Wheel of Valor. So basically what happens is we got like obviously the wheel, we got certain categories. So
Sure.
unsung heroes, take the L, history lessons, touchdowns, sliding doors, you up, hold the line, chasing waterfalls. This isn't where I park my car. So you're telling me there's a chance. And each basically category has a corresponding question to it. So I'm going to hold this down, give it a big spin. Don't be shy about it. Touchdown. What do we got here? Okay. So what's one personal success that seemed small to others but was monumental for you?
I'll tell you, this is one that I'm on the threshold of it, but I'm divorced now, and that was a recent thing. That was, in 2022 is when that was finalized. But managing to keep things together for my kids in a way that's allowed them to stay connected to the community and to the world, so they go to private school, and that sacrifice coming out of that for me was extremely difficult. My daughter will finish that school. She will have her middle school graduation in a few months here, and I'm now in a much better position to where managing that has become a little bit easier. I'm grateful for the hard work that I've done to do that, but like it's something that I'm extremely proud of, that I was able to give them what I felt like they needed at this stage of their lives, and that I could hold on to like the part of myself that I needed to.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and thank you for coming in. I love this conversation. Like, obviously, I have a very high opinion of you, so I really appreciate you coming in and joining us on the Voices of Valor podcast. For those of you that out there that are listening, that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for you to do that?
I'm mainly, in terms of social media, you can access me on Instagram. Mine is, I have a funky username, is Daniel with the Soul, but I'm sure that'll be linked through your
we'll put
podcast.
in the details of the podcast.
But besides that, I'm at Trinity University. You find me there every day. So
awesome. Well, thanks again. And thanks for you guys for tuning in on this episode. If you liked this episode, don't forget to like our YouTube channel and subscribe. And you can also find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and the fancy TikTok. So until next time, we appreciate your support, and we'll see you then.